Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about the deadlifts and the fact that I do believe that the deadlift is a great hypertrophy exercise. And to me, it generally does feel like the people who say that it isn't, it does feel largely like a case of laziness. Because historically, people have always used the deadlift. For generations, it's been used as a successful exercise, even by bodybuilders, to get jacked. And it absolutely is. And when I say this, I'm not talking about doing a sumo deadlift with straps or anything like that. I'm talking about coming in and doing moderately heavy conventional deadlifts for rep work, right? Conventional, no straps. And I think that that is an important point, because if we're going to talk about forearm development and all of these things, it absolutely does contribute to it. Okay, and I want to make that point clear. It is an exercise that can help thicken up your entire body. Okay. Yes, now obviously the lion's share of that growth will be in the primary movers, the glutes and the hamstrings, but that's something that we need to think about too. You know, people will say, well, you know, it doesn't work that many muscles through a fairly long range of motion. Well, it does work the glutes and hamstrings through a sizable range of motion. Plus, again, people are like, well, I mean, how much work are you really doing? Well, look how much work you're doing. And again, we're not talking about running a really whippy bar with bumper plates, okay? We're talking about doing a real range of motion, pulling off the floor, maybe even doing some of it from deficits. Those muscles are being put through it, and you are moving a lot of weight, and there's a lot of tonnage involved. And it will work wonders for building your glutes and hamstrings. And again, people will make the argument, and I've seen people argue, well, my hamstrings didn't get that big, and then you look at what they used to do. It's like, come on, man, you're doing sumo pulls. Of course your hamstrings didn't get that big. You're taking some of the hamstring out of it, and you're doing a partial. And then on top of that, they're doing a really whippy bar on sumos and strapping up. And it's like, yeah, you're essentially just reducing range of motion further. And that's the thing, you know, that's the biggest argument made against the deadlift, is the lack of range of motion, okay? The lack of range of motion. So then if you start doing variations that take even more range of motion out, of course you should expect a limited return on your investment. You know, some common sense. But in the format that you see me doing it here, it does have a respectable range of motion, and I think that it does help add size. You know, and again, we're talking about activation of the glutes and the hamstrings. Then the quads to some extent, right? I think there is definitely quad activation. Now, does it compete with a squat? No. But if you look at the angles involved, is it a good complement to your squatting? Okay, but if you're doing full squatting, you're doing long range of motion squats. All right, we're doing the long range of motion squats. What's happening? Well, you're getting those deep knee angles. And even though I'm a big believer in doing lengthened position movements, I think that they bring a lot to the table. I think that's really where the brunt of your hypertrophy does have the potential to come from. In most muscles, there are exceptions. Okay, lengthened positions are a great thing. Right? They're a great thing. For secondary exercises, I think sometimes more your mid-range stuff can be beneficial. I don't think they're the best primary modality. But we do have plenty of studies showing that some muscles benefit well from that, things like triceps. Okay? And again, pointing out that, you know, studies aren't everything when it comes to exercise science. But generally speaking, there were periods of time when I didn't squat and I took leg work off and focused just on deadlifts, and my thighs still stayed quite big. And I felt like I did get quad activation. So I think that they do contribute. I, again, would not advocate that you use the deadlift as a primary, but as a secondary exercise to get additional quad development. Again, also the angles being slightly different. Okay, I think it can be. Now, what about stuff like traps? I think the deadlift's a great trap exercise. Let's come over back to that loaded Lincoln position. I mean, how many people out there will try to claim that above the knee rack pulls are great for traps? They want to talk about loaded carries being great for traps. Well, what about the deadlift? There is more dynamic involvement still with really heavy weight in the traps on a deadlift. Okay, because you're not only in that stretch position, but there is dynamic movement because of the rotation of the shoulder. Unlike some of those others where it's almost in a fixed position, purely an isometric stretch, which again does add some hypertrophy. It does add some hypertrophy. We can't claim that it's negligible because it does seem to add some. And we've seen it. We've seen people who don't do any other back work or shoulder work other than deadlifts, and their traps do grow. Again, am I saying that it's the king? No, of course not. Of course not. But when fit into a structured program, there is definitely stimulus there. And if there is stimulus there, it contributes. And that's kind of the point that I come to. When you start looking at the totality of what the exercise does and what it brings to the table, it does use the glutes and the hamstrings as major primary movers, and it loads a lot of tension onto them. Okay? But then all this secondary stress that it adds, when you start factoring this into your program, it has carryover. It absolutely has carryover, because again, when we're looking at muscle growth, we're not always looking at, hey, what did a single set or a single exercise do? Your muscles care about what was their sum total stimulus that they received. Okay? And if you're already doing other stuff, for example, this is a great example. Let's say you're doing pull-ups and squats already. Pull-ups are putting your lats and all that stuff through a long range of motion to a lengthened position. And that is a big chunk of your growth. You don't think the deadlifts are still going to contribute some additional training response? Of course they will. Same thing with the quads. Let's say most of your quad stimulus is coming from your squats. If you're coming and doing some volume on heavy deadlifts, you don't think that additional stimulus is going to hit a few fibers that got missed maybe in those other positions? I think that it will. But we know it's going to grow the posterior chain. We know that. That's a given. All of that's going to grow. But then we get the other stuff, the additional forearm growth, the grip training, all of these things. I don't think that they're insignificant. And again, we've just seen, let's set that aside and look at the anecdote. How many countless cases have we seen of monstrously massive men who use the deadlift as a serious exercise? How many serious high-level top bodybuilders have done so successfully? Plenty. Okay, and you can't discount that either. If we're going to look at anecdote, and people will say stuff like, well, a lot of bodybuilders don't do it. Yeah, but how many of them who are winning do? They absolutely do. It has its place. Plus the fact that it's just awesome. Right? And we can't discount the awesome factor. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys next time.